Hi everyone, my name is Herkif and welcome back to my incredibly stupid hardcore world where I'm only allowed to use wooden tools and leather armor. In our last episode, we managed to make even more progress on our base, as it actually has some sort of functionality at this point. However, it still looks like the home of an average government employee, as it's completely void of any personality and details. So we're starting this episode off by doing some work on our interior, which I did by spamming a bunch of decorated pots and putting a cherry wood sapling followed by cherry leaves. I know, groundbreaking stuff. I also decided to decorate my bedroom as well, in which I used paintings and bookshelves, like the Neanderthal of a builder that I am. But after we've had our interior decorating moment, I decided to be a tiny bit more productive, which I did by enchanting all of the tools in our toolbox, which admittedly should probably have been dealt with a long time ago. But just like with many other things, I had previously left it for future Herkef to deal with in hopes that the task would somehow resolve itself in a very magical fashion, though unfortunately, that didn't happen. So now I'm stuck with this rather mundane task. But nevertheless, I bought all of the books we needed and flew back to our starter base to use our raid farm. This, as you can imagine, took a very long time, but there was a silver lining to this rather monotonous task. Since we were using our raid farm to enchant all of our tools, we also ended up with a bunch of emeralds as well, which I spent pretty much immediately on glass. However, this expenditure was actually quite warranted, as we still haven't filled in the windows of our base, and our next project I had planned needed a bunch of glass as well, so I got to finish up our base's windows like the very good boy that I am. And once done, I returned to my starter base once more, even though we should be completely moved into our new base at this point. But the reason was that our starter base is basically next door to a snowy biome, meaning we would be able to get our slimy hands on some ice. The reason we needed ice was because we needed to fill a large area with water for our new project. And as some of you may have guessed, given that we're collecting all of this ice, as well as the very obvious title, and probably thumbnail of this video, our next project will be a gigantic aquarium, and this aquarium will take up an entire section of our megabase. And now you might be thinking to yourself, why build something so useless in such a usable space? Wouldn't it be better to leave that space so you can build a farm or something else that is useful? And to that, I respond, actually, now that I think about it, you have a pretty good point. But anyways, I made my way back to our megabase and started work on our aquarium. My brilliant master plan I decided to go for in this watery endeavor was to build a layer at the very top of the space I wanted to fill, to then place all the water, and then remove said layer to have it fill up the rest of the tank. I know, I'm very smart. And not only that, my brain then mutated and got a third brain cell, which made me come to the conclusion that I should start off by using netherrack, as I thought it would be nice if I was able to instamine the blocks once the top layer of water was in place. However, that brain cell seemed to die rather quickly, as I completely forgot to light up the platform as I was building it. This led to me being bullied by a bunch of pesky spiders. This, paired with the fact that I had to build this entire platform whilst crouching, made for a less than optimal gaming experience. But on a real note, I had absolutely no idea that spiders could spawn in 1.5 block tool spaces. Did you know that? Leave a comment if you did. And if you didn't, just leave a comment, and like, and subscribe. Thanks. But now that we are done being an obnoxious YouTuber for the moment, we can get back to our platform. I unfortunately ran out of netherrack about halfway to finishing the platform, which was rather problematic. So the logical response would probably have been to try to find another block you can instamine so that we won't hate our life in the very near future. However, what I decided to do was to make it future Herkef's problem by starting to use black stone slabs, like the very cheap git that I am. And once the platform was finally finished, I started placing all of the ice. I am convinced that there was probably a better way to place the ice than the way I did, but I had unfortunately already spent all of my smart points by coming up with the netherrack idea. Thus, we're unable to do anything smart again, for at least a little while. And quite needless to say, I did indeed hate my life because of my previous choice of using blackstone. But when we had finally finished destroying our platform to let our water do its thing, I started collecting a bunch of kelp which I was intending to use to convert all of the flowing water to source blocks. I then placed said kelp at the bottom of our soon-to-be aquarium. However, whilst placing the kelp like the very productive citizen I am, I noticed something rather devastating. Since we were using top slabs as our floor, we could actually waterlog them, which would cause water to spill out from below the slab. And by using said water, some of our second-class citizens managed to escape onto the roof of our trading hall, which was very annoying, and following their very tragic and unforeseen deaths, I started filling their slots with new victims. Once that rather annoying and very much avoidable ordeal had been dealt with, I got back and started removing all of the kelp and added some decorations to our inside walls. I decided to go with the exact design of our exterior wall, since I'm not very imaginative. We then got onto the activity that was the main reason we enchanted our tools earlier, which was to collect a bunch of sand. I know, very exciting. My idea for this giant aquarium was to basically make it a coral reef with a bunch of corals and tropical fish, as well as some custom rock spikes. And in order to do that, we had to use sand for the bottom of our aquarium. And since I wanted the aquarium to look a tiny bit more natural, I made a few elevations in said sand. I then prepared for our next step, which was to make a bunch of rocky spikes. So I hopped on a creative world and practiced building them and tried some stuff out. However, as per usual, I forgot to record that, but here you can see my practice spikes. Fabulous, aren't they? However, as I quite often do, I shot myself in the foot as I decided to use a gradient for our spikes that involved tuff. And since we didn't have a massive amount of the other blocks we needed either, I realized that we had to go for a resource gathering mission. And after having mined a bunch of stone and risked my life to get some tuff, I got to building our spikes. And rather surprisingly, they actually turned out quite good, which I was very happy about. However, since we used gradients for our rocky spikes, they had technically been built using a more advanced building technique than the rest of our base, which was a rather horrific intrusive thought I got now as I'm writing the script. But putting that utterly dreadful observation aside, I went off on yet another resource gathering mission, but this time we collected coral. And after having spent even more time gathering materials, I got to constructing the coral in our aquarium, meaning I had basically just transplanted some of the ocean below my base into my base, which is an observation that slightly diminishes the purpose of this build. But to be completely fair, this build wasn't really meant to be functional or useful, so I digress. In addition to placing the coral blocks, I also decided to place my remaining coral fans on the floor in hopes of adding even more color to the build. I also spammed a bunch of pickles to light everything up, as I thought it would be nice to actually see what we've spent most of this episode building. I then got to bone mealing the floor, which apparently creates coral fans, meaning that us placing all of the coral fans manually was a complete waste of time. But now all that remained was to grab ourselves a bunch of tropical fish to complete this build. So I went down to the local wildlife reserve and stole some of their fish. I also made sure to give them really creative and fun names, fish. But with that project complete, I thought it might be a good idea to build the ceiling of our main living area, which should probably have been done a good while back. My first idea was to have the ceiling be a fog effect using cyan glass with some sea lanterns sprinkled in, which is something I have done in a previous world. However, since I'm running sodium, the fog effect only works downwards, which meant that I was forced to think of something else. So I got the idea to go back to the desert once more and grab some sandstone, as I thought it would make sense with the aquatic theme of our base. And since I couldn't think of any better idea, or rather, couldn't be bothered to think of any others, I decided to go with it. And just to make things a tiny bit more exciting, I sprinkled in some normal sandstone with the smooth sandstone for a bit of texturing, which I was very proud of. I can't say I'm overly happy with the ceiling, but knowing myself, I will most probably never do anything about it as I am very lazy. But to make up for the rather underwhelming ceiling, I decided to install a floor using the cyan fog effect in our teat with a violently erect nipple. So the idea of this fog effect is to start off with a full layer of sea lanterns to then gradually have less sea lanterns sprinkled in with the cyan glass. But in order to do that, we needed significantly more glass than we had to our name. I know, surprising. So I flew back to our starter base once more to use our raid farm to get some emeralds, which we could in turn use for glass. And once the glass was acquired, I got back to building the floor of our teat. The idea I had for this room was to install our nether portal. The reason for this is that I couldn't think of a better placement for it in our base, and our current nether portal at the time was still installed inside our villager breeder, which was a rather suboptimal position for it. And once our floor was complete, I started adding the same framing on the inside of our half sphere as we have on the outside of it. That's right, I just called it a half sphere. I'm moving away from the teat bit, as I am a very mature and sophisticated adult. And from there, all we had to do was to deconstruct the portal in our villager breeder and install it in our newly built room. But that is about all the time we have for this episode. So there we have it, our 8th episode of our incredibly stupid hardcore world. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.